On September 2nd, 2023, the skies over San Pedro, Mexico were bright and calm, a perfect day for celebration. Dozens of friends and relatives gathered in a garden decorated with pastel balloons and a glowing sign reading, "Oh baby." They were waiting for a single thrilling moment, the reveal of a baby's gender. Above them, 32-year-old pilot Luis Angel N. prepared for a short, simple flight in his Piper PA-25 Pawnee. The small aircraft had been fitted with a device to release pink or blue smoke, a service Luis had performed for other families. Flying was more than a job to him. It was a passion that allowed him to add magic to special occasions. At about 3 p.m., guests spotted a white speck approaching across the sky. As the Pawnee swept low over the party, a thick plume of pink smoke streamed behind its wings. Cheers erupted and confetti cannons burst, confirming a baby girl. The expectant couple hugged, their faces radiant, unaware of the danger overhead. Just seconds later, as Luis banked left to climb away, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses later reported seeing the aircraft's left wing flex and buckle. Video footage suggested the maneuver may have put excessive stress on the aging airframe, or an unseen weakness had given way. The wing snapped and the plane rolled violently into a spin. The Piper plunged from the sky, disappearing behind nearby trees. Most guests, still caught up in the moment, didn't hear the distant crash over the music. Rescue crews were dispatched within minutes. Firefighters and paramedics from the Sinaloa Red Cross found the wreckage only a few hundred yards from the celebration. Luis was alive but critically injured, pinned in the cockpit. They freed him and rushed him to a hospital, but he succumbed to his injuries soon after arrival. Clips of the tragedy spread rapidly online, shocking viewers with their contrast. The couple's joy framed against the aircraft's sudden collapse. Many were disturbed by how quickly the camera panned back to the smiling parents, unaware that the pilot who'd helped create their special moment had lost his life. Luis's death added to a growing list of accidents linked to extravagant gender reveal events. What began as small, playful announcements has, in some cases, escalated into high-risk spectacles. Fires, explosions, and aviation stunts with devastating consequences. For Luis, the job was supposed to be straightforward, a brief pass over a party to release colored smoke. Instead, it became his final flight. He left behind grieving family, colleagues, and a community of pilots who knew the thin line between safe flying and disaster, especially at low altitude. The San Pedro crash is a sobering reminder that even joyous occasions can carry unforeseen danger. Behind every carefully staged spectacle are real machines and real people whose lives depend on respect for limits. Luis Angel's story shows how quickly celebration can turn to heartbreak, and how precious each moment truly is. On February 12, 2010, anticipation and nerves filled the icy morning air at the Whistler Sliding Center, where the world's best lugers prepared for their last practice before the Vancouver Winter Olympics began. Carved into a British Columbia mountainside, the course had earned a reputation as the fastest, most technically demanding luge track ever built, with 17 curves and speeds topping 95 miles per hour. Its cutting-edge design thrilled athletes, but also raised alarms after several crashes during training runs. Among those readying for a final descent was 21-year-old Nodar Kumaritashvili of Georgia. Small in stature but brave in spirit, he carried the pride of his nation and the legacy of his father, a former luger. Nodar had grown up training on limited tracks with worn equipment, supported by a family who sacrificed much so he could pursue his Olympic dream. Competing on this global stage was the pinnacle of years of effort, and despite the intimidating track, he was determined to prove himself. Whistler's course, with its steep start and punishing G-forces, pushed sliding technology and athletes to the limit. Officials insisted it met international standards, yet whispers about its extreme speed persisted. Nodar, like others, had wrestled with its unforgiving turns during practice, but remained focused, working with coaches to refine each line through the labyrinth of ice. That morning, he positioned himself on his sled for what should have been another rehearsal. The opening section went smoothly. He carved through the early bends with precision, gradually accelerating. Spectators and staff watched as his sled hurtled toward the lower section, nearing 90 miles per hour. Approaching the final curve, disaster struck in an instant. A slight steering slip combined with blistering speed sent Nodar off his intended path. The sled slammed against the wall, launched upward, and hurled him clear of the track. Traveling at nearly 90 miles per hour, he collided with an exposed steel pillar beyond the safety wall, suffering catastrophic head and neck injuries. Helmets and padding offered no protection from such force. Stunned athletes, coaches, and officials stood frozen as rescue teams rushed in. Medics reached him within moments, but the trauma was too severe. He was pronounced dead shortly afterward at Whistler Healthcare Center, only hours before the game's opening ceremony, a tragedy that darkened what was meant to be a celebration of human achievement. The shocking accident reverberated far beyond the sliding community. Organizers swiftly raised the track's walls, added extra padding, and shortened the start position to slow runs for the competition. In the months that followed, Nodar's death fueled a searching debate about the balance between thrilling speed and athlete safety. Governing bodies ordered worldwide reviews of luge, skeleton, and bobsleigh courses, leading to stricter design standards and emergency protocols. For Georgia, Nodar remained a national hero, remembered for courage and determination despite scarce resources. For the wider Olympic world, his loss was a somber reminder that even in arenas built for excellence, the pursuit of records must never eclipse the duty to protect those who chase them. His final run forever changed sliding sports, leaving behind reforms that continue to safeguard athletes on ice tracks everywhere. In July 2013, the rooftops of St. Petersburg shimmered in the warmth of summer, inviting thrill seekers to test their nerve against the open sky. Among them was Pavel Kashin, a 24-year-old Russian freerunner whose daring stunts had already made him a star in the world of parkour. To him, the city's skyline wasn't scenery. It was a stage where he could turn gravity into an art form. That afternoon, Kashin stood on the ledge of a 16-story residential block, the street stretching below like a map. The strip of concrete beneath his sneakers measured barely 3 feet across, a fragile border between life and a 200-foot fall. Most people would freeze at such a height. For Kashin, who had trained his body to leap, flip, and land with flawless precision, the risk was part of the craft. Beside him, a friend steadied a camera, ready to record what Pavel hoped would be his most breathtaking stunt yet, a backflip from the edge, landing safely on the same ledge. It was a move that had drawn millions of views online, earning him thousands of followers who marveled at his control over peril. He had practiced similar flips many times, rehearsing every detail, the push from the toes, the tucked spin, the pinpoint landing. Yet on this ledge, the margin for error was non-existent. Kashin inhaled, centering himself as adrenaline surged. He sprang upward, arching into a perfect backward somersault, body taut and balanced against the wind. For a heartbeat, everything went exactly to plan. His feet touched the ledge, but something felt off. Perhaps his shoes found a slick patch of concrete, or the landing was a fraction too far back. Whatever the cause, stability slipped away. The camera froze his final moment upright. Arms spread, knees bent, a look of fierce concentration as he teetered over the abyss. In an instant, control gave way to gravity. Kashin pitched backward, vanishing from the frame, plummeting the full height of the building. The 4-second fall ended with a catastrophic impact on the pavement below. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Pavel Kashin was pronounced dead where he landed. His career and life ended by a single misstep. News of his death swept through Russia's parkour and free-running communities, reverberating across social media where he had once been celebrated for elegance and bravery. Friends mourned a pioneer who had pushed the sport's limits and inspired others to follow. He was not the first to be lost to the unforgiving edge of rooftops. The year before, a young woman in the same city had died during her very first parkour lesson after falling 17 stories. But Kashin's stature made this tragedy resonate far beyond local headlines. In an unusual decision, Pavel's parents allowed the publication of the still image showing him at the peak of his stunt, balanced on the brink. They hoped it might caution others about the real dangers behind urban acrobatics, particularly roof-topping, the practice of performing on the ledges of tall buildings without safety gear. Today, that photograph endures as one of the most haunting images in the history of parkour. It captures both the grace and the peril that defined Kashin's short life, a young athlete suspended between triumph and disaster, moments from an irreversible fall. For those who continue to chase the rush of high-altitude stunts, his story is a sober reminder that skill cannot always outmatch gravity, and that every leap carries consequences as real as the city streets far below. On August 26, 1960, the blazing Roman sun bore down mercilessly on the Olympic cycling course. Temperatures climbed past 104 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the 100-kilometer team time trial into a punishing test of stamina and survival. One of the favorites for a medal was the Danish squad, a tightly drilled quartet whose strength lay in precision, pacing, and relentless discipline. But on that searing afternoon, the riders would face far more than their rivals. They would battle conditions that threatened their very lives. Among them was Knud Enemark Jensen, a determined 23-year-old who had dedicated years to reaching the sport's highest stage. Lean and wiry, he had trained through Denmark's frigid winters and raced across Europe to refine the speed and resilience demanded by Olympic competition. For Jensen, Rome represented the culmination of ambition, sacrifice, and countless miles on the saddle. The Danish team had prepared meticulously for the event, studying every rise and curve of the Roman route. The course featured stretches of open road exposed to the sun, gentle hills, and technical turns where efficiency and teamwork could decide medals. Yet the weather presented a challenge no one had fully anticipated. Few athletes in 1960 had experienced racing in such oppressive heat, and sports science offered limited guidance on hydration and electrolyte loss. Riders relied on instinct, experience, and a drive to persevere, sometimes at the expense of safety. The race began with confidence. The Danes set a strong rhythm, Jensen tucked behind his teammates in an aerodynamic line. Early on, they held pace with the best squads, their strategy unfolding exactly as rehearsed. But as the kilometers ticked by, the temperature climbed higher, and the strain of maintaining speed under the punishing sun became evident. Sweat streamed from beneath helmets, and muscles began to cramp as riders fought dehydration. Midway through the trial, Jensen's form began to falter. Observers later recalled that he looked pale and unsteady, his pedal stroke losing its fluidity. The heat was overwhelming his body's cooling systems, yet he kept pushing, unwilling to let down his country or his teammates. Support crews had little opportunity to intervene. The era's medical oversight was rudimentary, and athletes were largely left to manage their own well-being. As the race entered its final stages, Jensen's distress deepened. Then, without warning, he collapsed, tumbling from his bicycle and striking his head hard on the pavement. Teammates and officials rushed to his side, finding him unconscious in the scorching road. The severity of his condition was obvious. He was suffering not only from a catastrophic fall, but from the ravages of extreme heat stroke. Jensen was rushed by ambulance to a nearby hospital in Rome, where doctors worked urgently to stabilize him. They treated him for a fractured skull and for the effects of hyperthermia, but medical tools and knowledge of the time offered little hope for someone so gravely stricken. Despite their efforts, Knud Enemark Jensen succumbed to his injuries. His life cut short just hours after the event. His death shocked the Olympic community and sent tremors through the world of cycling. It was a stark reminder that athletic pursuit, particularly under extreme conditions, could exact an unbearable cost. Investigations into the tragedy spurred calls for better protections, stricter weather protocols, on-course medical support, and deeper research into the effects of heat on endurance athletes. Jensen's legacy endures not only as a talented young cyclist lost too soon, but also as a catalyst for reform. Safety measures introduced in subsequent decades, from shaded feeding zones and improved helmets to comprehensive medical monitoring, owe much to lessons learned from that harrowing day in Rome. His sacrifice helped shape the safeguards that allow today's riders to chase glory with far greater protection against the dangers he bravely faced. On October 1st, 1995, the air at Niagara Falls carried a brisk hint of autumn as thousands of visitors crowded the overlooks to watch the famous cataract hurl itself 167 feet into the gorge. Among them was Robert Overacker, a 39-year-old from Camarillo, California. A graduate of a professional stunt school, he had spent 7 years preparing for a feat he believed would combine spectacle with purpose, riding a jet ski over Horseshoe Falls while deploying a rocket-powered parachute. This was not, he insisted, just about chasing thrills. On the side of his craft, he had painted a message: save the homeless, hoping the stunt would draw attention to people living on the streets. Waiting nearby were his brother Michael Zurich and friend Christopher Yeaman, cameras in hand, ready to film what they believed would be a breathtaking but safe descent. None of them imagined they were about to document his final moments. At 12:35 p.m., Overacker eased his jet ski into the Niagara River near the Canadian power plant. The engine whined as he accelerated toward the roaring curtain of water, expertly steering through treacherous rapids. Twice before he had come to the falls, only to abandon the attempt under pressure from friends. Now, after meticulous planning, he seemed calm and focused. As he neared the brink, Tourists raised cameras of their own. A German visitor, Manfred Baldus, recorded the scene as the craft sped forward, spray flying, determination etched across Overacker's face. Reaching the edge, he released the handlebars and thrust both arms skyward in triumph, beginning the 167-foot plunge. Those seconds were meant to end with his parachute bursting open, slowing his fall so he could splash safely into the turbulent basin. Instead, to the crowd's horror, nothing happened. Later reports suggested the harness might not have been fastened correctly, leaving the chute unable to deploy. For 5.6 heartbeats, he dropped unprotected, perhaps realizing the system had failed. He hit the churning river below with devastating force. As one park dispatcher later noted, from that height, water is like concrete. A few onlookers thought they glimpsed him swimming, but rescuers would conclude it was only the rapids tossing his body. Crew members from the Maid of the Mist tour boat hauled him from the water and tried to revive him, but Overacker was pronounced dead about an hour later at Niagara General Hospital. He became the 15th person since 1901 to intentionally go over Niagara Falls in or on a device, and the 5th to die attempting it. Overacker left behind his wife Lori and a stunned circle of friends and family. In the years since, several others have attempted similar plunges. A few have survived, 2 have not. Yet Overacker's leap remains one of the fall's most haunting tragedies, largely because of the video that captured his doomed flight. In the recording, he appears victorious, arms raised, unaware that safety lay only in the chute that never opened. What was meant as a daring statement for a worthy cause instead ended in heartbreak. His story endures as a sobering reminder that even the most carefully planned adventure can turn lethal in an instant, and that behind the spectacle are real people, with hopes, convictions, and loved ones left to mourn. On July 14, 1912, the midsummer sun blazed over Stockholm, turning the Swedish capital into a furnace as marathon runners assembled at the Olympic Stadium. Ahead lay 40.2 kilometers of dusty roads stretching through the countryside, a course that would test even the most seasoned endurance athletes. By midday, temperatures approached 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a punishing heat few had anticipated. The Stockholm Games were only the 5th modern Olympics, held in an era when sports medicine was rudimentary and safety protocols for endurance events barely existed. Water stations were sparse, medical support minimal, and athletes were expected to fend for themselves against the elements. Among the competitors was Francisco Lazaro, a determined 21-year-old from Lisbon, representing Portugal's first-ever Olympic marathon entry. He carried the pride of an entire nation on his lean shoulders. Portugal had little experience with elite athletics, and resources for training were scarce, yet Francisco's talent and perseverance had brought him to this world stage. He had prepared as best he could in Portugal's milder climate, but nothing in his background matched the fierce Scandinavian heat waiting for him that day. Like many athletes of the time, Francisco relied on advice now understood to be dangerously misguided. Before the race, he coated his body with a thick layer of wax and oil, hoping to prevent sweat from causing chafing or slowing him down. Instead, the coating would seal in heat, crippling his body's ability to regulate temperature, a decision that would have tragic consequences. The starting gun cracked, and the runners surged from the stadium into the countryside. Dust rose from the unpaved roads, mixing with shimmering waves of heat. Francisco paced himself cautiously at first, maintaining steady strides as he sought to conserve energy for the grueling distance ahead. Spectators lined parts of the route, cheering as the athletes pressed on, but little support awaited them beyond encouragement. There were only a handful of water stations, and medical personnel were nowhere along the course. As the race progressed, the relentless sun exacted its toll. Runners began to falter, some slowing to a walk, others dropping out altogether. Francisco, though clearly laboring, pressed on with quiet determination. He was running not only for himself, but for a country eager to make its mark on the Olympic map. By the halfway point, however, the signs of danger were unmistakable. His stride grew uneven, his face pale beneath a sheen of trapped perspiration. Witnesses later reported that his lips were cracked and his movements seemed mechanical, driven purely by willpower. Near the 19th mile, Francisco's body could no longer endure the strain. His temperature had climbed to a perilous level, later estimated at 106 degrees Fahrenheit. He staggered, then collapsed onto the sun-baked road. Passers-by rushed to assist, and he was taken to a Stockholm hospital. But treatment options for severe heat stroke in 1912 were limited and crude. Despite doctors' efforts, he never regained consciousness. In the early hours of July 15th, Francisco Lázaro died, becoming the first Olympic athlete to lose his life as a direct result of competition. News of his death reverberated throughout the Games and beyond. Officials, athletes, and spectators alike were stunned that an event intended to celebrate endurance and triumph could lead to such tragedy. For Portugal, the loss was deeply personal. Their first marathon runner, who had set out to honor his nation, had perished in pursuit of that goal. Francisco was mourned as a hero, his funeral drawing widespread attention and sympathy from the international sporting community. His passing also became a turning point for Olympic safety. Organizers recognized that endurance races required structured support, shaded rest points, frequent water supplies, and medical teams along the route. Future marathons would adopt these precautions, shaping the modern standards that safeguard athletes today. Francisco Lázaro's story endures as a sobering reminder of both courage and vulnerability. He embodied the Olympic spirit, giving everything in pursuit of a dream. Though his life ended far too soon, his sacrifice prompted reforms that have protected countless runners since that sweltering day in Stockholm. On January 15, 2023, the skies over Nepal were crisp and bright as Yeti Airlines Flight 691 prepared to make the short hop, just 27 minutes from Kathmandu to Pokhara. 72 passengers and crew settled into the ATR 72-500, anticipating a smooth journey to one of Nepal's most popular tourist regions. Among them was Sonu Jaiswal, a 25-year-old liquor shop owner from Ghazipur, India. A father to 3 young daughters, Jaiswal had crossed into Nepal with friends Abhishek Kushwaha, Anil Rajbar, and Vishal Sharma for what they hoped would be a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. 2 days earlier, the group had prayed at the sacred Pashupatinath temple, where Jaiswal reportedly wished for a son. Their pilgrimage complete, they set out for Pokhara, eager for sightseeing and paragliding beneath the dramatic Annapurna peaks. As the twin-engine plane neared its destination that Sunday morning, Jaiswal pulled out his phone and began a Facebook live stream, a familiar impulse to share the experience with loved ones at home. The early moments of the 92-second clip felt routine. Through Jaiswal's window, viewers could glimpse neat fields, rooftops, and the silver ribbon of a river. Inside the cabin, conversation flowed easily. Passengers laughed, relaxed, and took in the scenery. Jaiswal, dressed in a yellow sweater, turned the camera toward himself, smiling broadly, then panned across the cabin to capture his companions. Nothing in the scene hinted at danger. No warning came from the cockpit. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The aircraft abruptly rolled to the left. Shouts of alarm filled the cabin as the phone's image shook violently. A shrill, mechanical noise, later identified as an engine warning, cut through the confusion. Flames flickered across the frame. Seconds later, the recording ended. Flight 691 had plunged into a gorge just beside Pokhara's newly opened international airport. All 72 people on board were killed, marking Nepal's worst aviation disaster in 3 decades. Nearly 270 miles away in Ghazipur, news bulletins soon flashed images of scorched wreckage and rising plumes of smoke. For the Jaiswal family, disbelief turned to anguish when they learned that Sonu's live video, already spreading across social media, showed the crash from inside the cabin. "We couldn't believe it until we saw the footage," said his brother Deepak. "It was unbearable." Investigators later concluded that the plane entered an aerodynamic stall as it lined up to land. Cockpit data indicated the crew had requested a runway change moments before impact. Whether pilot error or mechanical fault caused the loss of control remains the subject of ongoing analysis. The tragedy carried an added layer of sorrow in the story of co-pilot Anju Kadiwada. She had pursued flight training after her husband, also a Yeti Airlines pilot, died in a 2006 crash. 16 years later, she perished at the controls of Flight 691. For bereaved families, Jaiswal's video became both precious and painful. A final glimpse of loved ones alive, yet an unflinching record of their last seconds. His father journeyed to Kathmandu to identify and bring home his son's remains, while Deepak mourned not only a brother, but a confidant and friend. Sonu Jaiswal's final live stream underscores the fragility of life and the speed with which ordinary moments can turn catastrophic. Intended as a cheerful memento of a holiday flight, it instead became a stark historical document, one of the rare occasions when a passenger captured, from inside the cabin, the closing moments of a doomed aircraft. On February 22, 1992, crisp alpine air swept over Les Arcs, France, as Olympic spectators gathered to watch an event unlike any other. Speed skiing, featured as a demonstration sport at the Albertville Games, pushed competitors to exceed 120 miles per hour on sheer mountain slopes. That morning promised flawless conditions. Clear skies, a meticulously prepared course, and snow firm enough for record-breaking runs. It would also be the last time the sport appeared on the Olympic program. Among the athletes preparing was Switzerland's Nicolas Boquete, a 27-year-old veteran of this perilous discipline. Years of training on treacherous slopes had honed his lean physique and precise technique. Within the tight-knit speed skiing community, Nicolas was admired for his composure and mastery of high-velocity dynamics. For him, the Games were a chance to validate a career spent chasing a sport that demanded as much courage as skill. He knew this Olympic appearance might be his only one, and he intended to make it count. The Les Arcs course was notorious for its steep gradient and potential to shatter records. Nicolas had prepared meticulously, testing equipment, studying each section, and fine-tuning his aerodynamic suit to reduce drag. Teammates believed he was a legitimate contender for the podium in this short-lived Olympic showcase. On the morning of the finals, Nicolas joined teammates on a nearby public slope for a warm-up. The run was intended to loosen muscles and sharpen focus before their official attempts. Conditions were nearly perfect. Excellent visibility, solid snow, and calm winds. Everything about the moment felt routine to an athlete who had spent years flirting with speed's edge. As Nicolas descended, he encountered a small rise in the terrain. Skiers in this discipline often glide airborne for brief seconds, and he handled the bump with practiced ease. But as he landed, a danger appeared. An active snow grooming machine maneuvering along the slope. Its lights flashed and its siren blared, but Nicolas was traveling far too fast to divert. Within an instant, he collided with the massive snowcat. The impact was catastrophic, causing injuries that claimed his life at once. The accident happened around 9:30 a.m., stunning onlookers and shaking Olympic organizers unaccustomed to such tragedy during preparations. The Swiss delegation, grief-stricken, withdrew several athletes from the finals in his memory. Yet the competition went ahead as scheduled, framed by an unmistakable pall of loss. Nicolas Boquete's death underscored the razor-thin margin between triumph and disaster in extreme sports. Speed skiing had been created to celebrate audacious athleticism, but his accident forced officials to reassess its place on the world stage. The event was dropped from all future games, ending its brief Olympic tenure. Beyond the Games, the crash inspired changes. Safety measures for high-risk winter sports grew stricter, with closer attention to course access, equipment use, and separation between athletes and machinery. Discussions about balancing spectacle with responsibility gained urgency across international federations. For those who knew Nicolas, he remained more than a cautionary tale. He was a disciplined, fearless competitor who pursued excellence on the limits of control. Though his career was cut short on the eve of its greatest moment, his legacy influenced how organizers safeguard athletes in dangerous pursuits. The mountain where he fell continues to echo his commitment to a sport that demanded everything: speed, precision, and an unflinching heart. May 18, 1980 dawned quiet and clear over southwestern Washington. Mount St. Helens rose against the blue sky, its snowy summit hiding weeks of unrest beneath. For nearly 2 months, the volcano had groaned with earthquakes and vented steam, and its northern slope had swollen outward at an alarming pace. To Robert Landsberg, a 48-year-old freelance photographer from Portland, Oregon, the morning looked like another chance to chronicle a drama that had fascinated him since March. Landsberg had visited the mountain repeatedly, recording every stage of its transformation. Each trip yielded striking images of the growing bulge on the north face, an ominous deformation expanding several feet each day. That Sunday, he steered his 1969 Dodge station wagon to a ridge roughly 4 miles from the peak, unpacked his tripod, and set up his camera. The vantage point offered a perfect sweep of the volcano. In a journal entry the night before, he noted, "Feel right on the verge of something." He had no idea how prescient those words would be. At 8:32 a.m., a magnitude 5.1 earthquake shook the mountain. Landsberg, peering through his viewfinder, watched in disbelief as the entire north flank sheared away. Within seconds, a colossal landslide uncorked the volcano's interior, triggering the most devastating eruption in U.S. history. The blast released energy equivalent to thousands of atomic bombs. A dark gray wall of ash and gas shot skyward, while a searing lateral surge roared across the landscape at over 300 miles per hour. Even as chaos unfolded, Landsberg kept working. Frame by frame, his camera captured the eruption's opening moments, the rock slide, the rising column of ash, and the billowing pyroclastic cloud racing toward him. When escape became impossible, he acted with deliberate calm. He rewound the film into its canister, tucked the camera inside his backpack, and lay across it, shielding the record of what he had seen. Moments later, the torrent of superheated ash, hot enough to melt metal, swept over the ridge. Landsberg was killed instantly, one of 57 people claimed by the disaster. His body lay entombed beneath volcanic debris for more than 2 weeks. On June 4th, rescuers finally reached the site and found something extraordinary. The backpack had protected both camera and film from the worst of the inferno. Though the negatives were scarred by heat, they remained largely printable. When developed, the images revealed the eruption's birth with unparalleled clarity. They showed the expanding cloud in successive bursts, each frame documenting seconds of an event that reshaped an entire mountain. National Geographic published the photographs in 1981, preserving not only what Landsberg saw, but also the physical marks, scratches, bubbles, warped emulsion left by fire and ash. The pictures became priceless scientific evidence, helping volcanologists understand how Mount St. Helens had exploded. Landsberg was not alone in his sacrifice. Photojournalist Reed Blackburn, stationed 8 miles away, perished when the blast overran his campsite. His film did not survive. U.S. Geological Survey scientist David Johnston, observing from 6 miles out, radioed a final message: "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," before the surge claimed him. Yet Landsberg's calm choice in the face of certain death remained singular. Rather than attempt a hopeless flight, he safeguarded the record he knew might benefit others. The May 18th eruption permanently altered the Pacific Northwest. Mount St. Helens lost 1,300 feet of elevation, leaving a vast horseshoe crater. Forests were leveled, rivers choked with mud, and thousands of animals destroyed. Amid the devastation, Landsberg's photographs endured as a testament to scientific curiosity and professional dedication. They were captured at the edge of annihilation, a final offering from a man who believed that documenting truth, no matter the risk, was worth everything. On July 27, 1996, Atlanta's warm evening buzzed with music and laughter as thousands of Olympic visitors gathered in Centennial Olympic Park. Designed as the social heart of the Games, the 21-acre plaza hosted concerts, art displays, and meetups that welcomed spectators from around the globe. That night, the band Jack Mack and the Heart Attack kept the crowd dancing under the summer sky, their lively tunes reflecting the celebratory spirit of the Olympics. Among those enjoying the free show was Alice Hawthorne, a 44-year-old mother from Albany, Georgia. She had carefully saved to bring her 14-year-old daughter to the Games, hoping to give her a once-in-a-lifetime memory. Their day had been filled with sightseeing and Olympic events. Now they stood near the stage, faces aglow with excitement. For Alice, the trip was more than entertainment. It was a chance to share an unforgettable moment with her child. Security in the park felt casual compared with guarded stadiums. The venue was meant to be a relaxed gathering spot, a symbol of unity rather than a fortress. Yet on duty that night was security guard Richard Jewell, scanning the crowd with a practiced eye. Close to the sound tower, he spotted an unattended backpack. Inside were 3 pipe bombs packed with nails. Jewell immediately alerted authorities and began clearing spectators from the area. His swift action saved many lives, but there wasn't enough time to protect everyone. At 1:20 a.m., as music played and visitors mingled, the device exploded. The blast ripped through the crowd, hurling metal shards and debris in every direction. The joyous scene dissolved into chaos, screams, smoke, and frantic attempts to flee. Alice was struck by shrapnel, collapsing as her daughter cried out in panic. Around them, more than 100 people suffered injuries, some from flying fragments, others from the crush of the fleeing crowd. Sirens pierced the night as police and medics poured into the park, working feverishly to aid the wounded amid toppled chairs and splintered barriers. What had been a peaceful celebration became a scene of terror. Despite rapid medical attention, Alice's wounds proved fatal. She was the only person killed directly by the bombing, though the attack left deep scars, physical and emotional, on many others. Her daughter survived, but was forever changed by the traumatic loss. The Centennial Olympic Park bombing shocked the world and shattered the sense that the Games were a sanctuary from violence. Yet, even as investigators searched for the perpetrator, the Olympics continued with tightened security. Within hours, checkpoints and bag inspections were strengthened across all venues, and safety planning became an urgent priority. Alice Hawthorne's death came to symbolize the vulnerability of spectators at global events. Her story spurred sweeping reforms in how the Olympics manage public spaces, leading to the comprehensive screening procedures and visible security presence now standard at every Games. Though her life was cut short in a moment meant for joy, the lessons drawn from that tragedy helped safeguard millions of future visitors, ensuring her sacrifice left a legacy of protection.